Hi, and thanks for logging on to the Daily DVAR Halacha. And here's a brand new halacha for you, and it's for Thursday, the 6th day of November. Here we go. You may be familiar with the usual rule, which is that if there's a mitzvah item lying around that you need to borrow, that you can usually assume that your fellow Jew would be happy to have you borrow it. A great example would be a tallis. If your tallis is lying beautifully folded up somewhere in the shul, and let's say you davened at the 6 o'clock minyan in the morning, okay, 7 o'clock minyan in the morning, and now your friend shows up at the 9 o'clock minyan. He knows that you've already davened and gone home. Your 9 o'clock friend can borrow your tallis because he can assume that you would be very happy to have your tallis have one more mitzvah happen with it that day. It got used by the first owner, the real owner, at 7 in the morning, and then the borrower got to use it at 9. Usually we assume that it's a mitzvah item, a mitzvah is being done with it, and you could assume that the owner is happy that this happens, and therefore the borrower, you the borrower, are allowed to assume that you could just borrow it. However, there are notable exceptions, and I want to tell them to you because in these exceptional situations, you may not be allowed to just borrow your friend's thing without asking. First of all, number one is if the owner's there. If the owner's right there for some reason, then you've got to ask him. It's really awkward that you're just grabbing his tallis and using it when, okay, he davened, but he's right there and he's going to find it really weird that you didn't ask him if he's right there. So if your friend is right there, the owner, then ask him by all means, and if he says yes, then of course you could borrow it. Also, you have to do a mitzvah with the item. If you want to borrow his tallis because you want to sit on it, to make your seat more comfortable on Shabbos, that's not what your friend is happy to have his tallis used for. He's happy to have his mitzvah item used for you doing a mitzvah. Also, if he keeps it very, sort of like put away in a very private locker or something, and you go into his private locker because it's, let's say, open, or you know the code and you just take it out of there, that also gets kind of iffy, and in that situation you might have to ask him permission and not just borrow it. Also, if it's totally brand new, you can't assume that he's totally okay with you borrowing it. You might have to ask him in that situation. Also, if it's a beautiful kind of sefer and you might be bending over the corners of the pages when you lean on it or whatever, and there could be reason to think that he might not want you using his beautiful new sefer with you leaning over and munching over its pages. So in situations like that, maybe you shouldn't be borrowing his sefer, his book, without asking him. Also, if the borrower is in some way unacceptable to the, possibly unacceptable to the owner, like let's say the borrower is sick. So it's possible that the owner says, you have the flu. I didn't want you borrowing my tallis. You have the flu. Then you shouldn't be doing it. If you, the borrower, and you'd have to know about yourself that if the owner might find you to be unkempt or unclean or something, when you're like, I'm clean, but the owner might not find you clean. So you have to think that out honestly about yourself, whether there's something about your smell, your whatever, that might make the owner not want you to use it, then you shouldn't be using it. Also, you cannot assume that the owner is okay with you borrowing it and taking it across the street to the other shul, even though you're going to bring it right back, but he might not want it taken out of the shul. That's a normal hakpada, a normal kind of, I don't know the English translation for that, a normal, like he'd care and he'd not want that done. So to take it out of the building to another shul, even though you're bringing it back, is not allowed. Also, when you bring it back, you're not allowed to take it out to bring it back, but even if you use it, you should be folding up that tallis the same way as best as you can to the way you found it, so that the owner, he would want it refolded in the way that you found it. And lastly, there are some people who would do this to an extent that's not acceptable. Like you would say, I don't need to buy a Shabbos tallis because so-and-so always davens at the 7 o'clock minyan, and I always daven at the 9 o'clock minyan, and he always leaves his tallis right there, so I'm always going to borrow it. That's not acceptable. It's an occasional thing that the guy wouldn't mind, but to know that you are going to be the continuous double user of his tallis every single day or week is not something that you could just assume. I mean, if you ask him and he says okay, then it's okay, but that's the kind of thing that you're not allowed to just go and assume. Thanks for logging on. By the way, this applies to other types of things, not just tallis. Could be tefillin, could be other mitzvah items, and within reason, the same kinds of ideas would apply. Thanks for logging on. Log on again tomorrow for more. Bye-bye.